Well, European countries export an array of goods to the U.S. French wines, Italian fashion, Irish butter. But for Germany, the car industry.
Trump is slapping 25% tariffs on all car imports from April 2nd.
It all started on March 27th, 2025, when President Donald Trump, aiming to strengthen domestic manufacturing, announced a shocking 25% tariff on all imported cars and their parts. The impact was immediate, sending ripples across the global economy. But the fallout was especially felt by Germany, a country whose automotive industry is a cornerstone of its economic might. For the United States, this tariff was framed as a move to bolster the domestic automotive sector by discouraging foreign imports. In his mind, this would be a win for American automakers and an opportunity to bring more production to U.S. shores. But for Germany, which has long been a powerhouse in the automotive industry, this tariff wasn't just a trade move. It was a direct assault on one of its most prized economic assets. The German car industry is the backbone of its manufacturing sector. Brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Audi, and Volkswagen are not only iconic for their engineering prowess, but also represent over $10 billion in annual exports to the U.S. That's massive. The U.S. is one of Germany's largest markets, and German cars are a symbol of luxury, quality, and precision engineering. And now, these very cars were being targeted by the U.S. administration through these heavy tariffs. Chancellor Olaf Scholz wasted no time in expressing his country's outrage. Germany's response was immediate, calling the tariffs wrong and warning that they would lead both countries down a road of mutual economic destruction. To put it bluntly, Germany wasn't going to take this lightly. The tariffs didn't just affect the bottom line. They threatened the integrity of a core part of the German economy, an industry that creates hundreds of thousands of jobs, both in Germany and in the U.S. But the Trump administration wasn't backing down. For them, the idea of protecting U.S. jobs and ensuring American-made products were a priority. But for Germany, this wasn't just about a financial dispute. It was about protecting a national identity, a symbol of their technological expertise, and an essential sector that contributed significantly to their economy. Initially, Germany did what it does best: play it cool. When President Trump first imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum, Germany expressed dissatisfaction but didn't escalate things too much. It remained a voice of reason in a world filled with trade disputes. However, this time, the tariffs hit too close to home. German auto manufacturers have a storied history of dominating the global market. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Audi, and Volkswagen are household names, not just in Europe, but in the US too. And now, with the 25% tariff placed on these imports, it felt like an existential threat to Germany's entire automotive sector. The backlash was immediate and forceful. Chancellor Olaf Scholz sharply condemned the tariffs, calling them wrong, not just for the US, but for the broader global economy. In fact, he went even further, saying that this would only lead both countries into a spiral of economic damage. And it wasn't just Scholz speaking out. Finance Minister Jörg Kukias took to the airwaves, warning that Germany would not back down. He openly declared that nothing is off the table in terms of retaliatory actions. This wasn't just a political issue for Germany, it was personal. The German automotive industry wasn't just a set of businesses, it was an integral part of the national fabric. Attacking the German car industry was seen as an attack on the German way of life. It wasn't a mere trade dispute, it was an affront to Germany's industrial heritage. Germany wasn't alone in its outrage. France, Italy, and Spain quickly rallied behind Germany, expressing their solidarity and agreeing that this was an issue for all of Europe. The European Union didn't sit back either. As Chancellor Scholz said, Germany was going to fight back, not just alone, but with the full weight of Europe behind it. What began as a trade dispute between two countries soon transformed into an all-out European response. Traditionally, Germany has been the calm negotiator in international trade talks. Europe often favors cooperation over confrontation. But this time, things were different. Germany didn't just sit on the sidelines. Instead, it made a dramatic pivot toward confrontation. After Trump's tariffs were announced, Germany was quick to signal that it would no longer tolerate such actions. The EU wasn't going to let Trump's trade war target its core industries without a response. German officials floated the idea of retaliatory tariffs, not just on cars, but on a range of US exports. These included everything from agriculture products, such as soybeans, to digital services from giants like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. The EU's retaliation plan wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction. It was part of a larger economic strategy to counter Trump's economic nationalism. President Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission weighed in, condemning Trump's actions as damaging to business and devastating for consumers. This was no longer just a political disagreement. It was a European response to what was being viewed as US economic aggression. France, Italy, and Spain joined in, each vocal in their support for Germany. It quickly became clear that Germany's battle was now Europe's battle, and the EU would not let the US impose tariffs without consequences. From Brussels to Berlin, European leaders rallied to defend the European economic interest, vowing that no country would be left standing alone in this trade war. The immediate impact of the tariffs on the automotive industry was felt not just by German manufacturers, but by American consumers as well. According to the Center for Automotive Research, these new tariffs are expected to spike US car prices by thousands of dollars. For American buyers, the dream of owning a German luxury car might become a financial stretch. But the worst hit will be the German automakers. BMW, Audi, and Mercedes-Benz already faced increasing challenges in the US market, but this new tariff pushed them to the edge. The $35 billion in German auto exports to the US is now under threat. The impact on US consumers is immediate. Higher prices for high-end vehicles, fewer options for the high-performance cars that Americans love, and ultimately, reduced access to some of the finest engineering the world has to offer. For the US automakers, while they stand to gain in the short term, the long-term repercussions could be disastrous for the industry's overall health. But it's not just about the cars. The global supply chain is feeling the pinch. German manufacturers rely on parts and components from all over the world, and now, with tariffs in place, suppliers in both Germany and the US are feeling the squeeze. With uncertainty hanging over the future of US-European trade relations, many companies have paused investment plans and slowed production. Germany's industrial base also extends beyond the automotive sector. Chemicals, AI technologies, precision manufacturing, all these sectors could soon feel the ripple effects of this tariff war. If the EU escalates its retaliation strategy, industries like pharmaceuticals and tech services could be drawn into the conflict, creating even greater uncertainty for the global economy. As the conflict deepens, it's clear that the effects of these tariffs go far beyond just German cars. What started as an automotive dispute is now threatening to engulf multiple sectors of the global economy. The European Union has made it clear, if the US wants to escalate this conflict, Europe will hit back, not just in automotive trade, but across multiple industries. One of the most powerful tools at Europe's disposal is digital taxation. Major US tech giants, like Amazon, Google, and Meta, have long benefited from a relatively free-flowing tax system in Europe. But now, the EU is resurrecting stalled proposals to tax these digital giants more aggressively. This could be just the tip of the iceberg. Europe is also considering slashing quotas for US agricultural exports, particularly soybeans, which have been a significant part of the US agricultural sector's exports to Europe. And don't forget American Airlines. Europe might impose tighter restrictions on their operations in European airspace as part of its wider retaliatory measures. This isn't just a trade war over cars anymore. Europe is ready to counterattack in a full-spectrum economic war, targeting everything from agriculture to technology. With the backing of countries like France, Italy, and Spain, the EU is standing firm, sending a clear message that it will not allow this to pass quietly. And it's not just Europe. Canada, which was also affected by Trump's tariffs, is now weighing its own set of countermeasures. If Germany, Brussels, and Ottawa align their interests, the US could soon find itself boxed in, fighting battles on multiple fronts: automobiles, technology, and agriculture. This is not just a battle of politicians or trade experts. The pressure is building on the factory floors of Germany. Assembly lines in Munich, Stuttgart, and Hamburg are starting to feel the effects of this conflict. Workers are concerned about their futures as German automakers face severe disruptions in their supply chains and production cycles. The unions that once tread lightly in international trade disputes are now stepping up to demand swift action. They are leading the charge for strong retaliation against the US, and their message is clear: Germany must not back down. In the halls of Germany's government, there's a growing sentiment that this trade war can't just be managed. It has to be confronted head-on. The political tone has shifted from diplomacy to defiance. From the Greens to the Christian Democrats, Germany's political class is united in saying, "We won't bow to Washington." But while political leaders are calling for retaliation, things are much more complex in the boardrooms of BMW, Mercedes, and Audi. These companies face a tough decision: retaliate against the US or preserve the decades of investment they've made in the US market. Shifting production could avoid tariffs, but would come at a massive cost. The dilemma is real. Germany and its automakers are caught between the pressure to defend their national pride and the economic reality of cross-Atlantic trade. This pressure will only increase as the trade war drags on. The announcement of President Trump's 25% tariffs on imported cars and parts didn't just rattle the automotive industry, it sent shockwaves through global financial markets. Almost immediately, stock markets around the world felt the impact. Equity markets in the United States, Europe, and Asia plunged as investors grappled with the growing uncertainty caused by the escalating trade dispute between the world's two largest economies. In the US, major indices such as the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite faced their worst quarterly performances since 2022. The S&P 500 alone dropped by a staggering 5.2% in the first quarter of 2025, its worst performance since the aftermath of the pandemic. The Nasdaq was hit even harder, with tech stocks, particularly those from Silicon Valley, plummeting as fears of retaliatory tariffs against the US tech sector began to mount. These dramatic declines were not isolated to the US markets. In Europe, the Euro Stoxx 50, which represents the largest companies across the Eurozone, saw a 7% drop, wiping billions of euros from the balance sheets of German, French, and Italian companies. Germany's DAX index, heavily weighted toward the automotive sector, plummeted, reflecting the immediate anxiety over the potential long-term impact of the tariffs on German automakers. Meanwhile, in Asia, the ripple effect was just as severe. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell by more than 6%, driven by a deep sense of unease about how Japan's exports might be affected by a larger global trade conflict. South Korea's Kospi also dropped significantly, as investors feared the tariffs would trigger a global economic slowdown, affecting trade routes and exports. And in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index plunged by 8%, as traders feared the escalating US-Germany tensions would affect not just autos, but the broader economy. But the biggest story wasn't the stock market declines. It was the growing sense of fear and uncertainty that gripped investors. One of the most notable trends during this period of market turmoil was the flight to safety. As the US tariffs sent shockwaves through global markets, investors turned to gold and other traditional safe haven assets. Gold prices surged to a record high of $3,128.06 per ounce, driven by the desire to protect wealth against the backdrop of rising trade tensions and potential global recession. This flight to safety was fueled by the widespread concern that the global economy could suffer a major slowdown if the trade war escalated further. The World Trade Organization, WTO, had already warned that global trade could contract by as much as 2.5% in 2025 if the US and Europe failed to reach a resolution. For the time being, the global economy was caught in a vicious cycle of uncertainty, where the more tariffs were imposed, the more market volatility spiked. The real fear among traders was that a trade war between the US and Europe would lead to broader recessionary pressures, affecting consumer demand, corporate profits, and overall global economic growth. Even with the European Union and Canada weighing their own retaliatory measures, there was no clear path forward. Economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic had only recently begun to gather steam, but now, the threat of tariffs had cast a long shadow over future prospects. With U.S. stocks and global markets suffering, the question on everyone's mind was, how long can this trade war last before it undermines global economic stability? Amid the growing trade tensions and market volatility, the European Central Bank, ECB, found itself facing an incredibly delicate balancing act. On the one hand, the Eurozone was grappling with inflationary pressures, with prices steadily rising in several countries, including Germany. On the other hand, the trade war and the looming possibility of further tariffs had the potential to tip the region into a recession. The latest figures from Germany, the Eurozone's largest economy, showed that inflation had fallen to 2.3% in March, slightly below the expected 2.4%. On the surface, this might seem like good news, especially since inflation had been stubbornly high in recent months, putting pressure on consumers and businesses. But this drop in inflation was not entirely a positive sign. It pointed to a slowing economy, which posed a major dilemma for the ECB. With inflation coming in lower than expected, there was renewed speculation that the ECB might have to take further action. Some market analysts suggested that this could pave the way for the ECB to announce another rate cut as early as April 2025. A rate cut could help stimulate the economy by making borrowing cheaper for businesses and consumers, encouraging spending and investment. However, the situation wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. On one side, ECB policymakers like François Villeroy de Galhau, the governor of the Bank of France, argued that U.S. tariffs would not derail Europe's ongoing deflationary trend. According to Villeroy, the recent drop in inflation was likely due to temporary factors such as lower energy prices, and the ECB's policy stance should not be swayed by short-term fluctuations. Villeroy also stated that Europe was in a much stronger position than it had been during previous global trade disputes, thanks to the structural reforms implemented over the past decade. So what happens next? Will Germany's retaliation strategy prove to be bold or risky? Will it hurt American consumers more than it affects German exporters? And will automakers start shifting production to avoid the tariffs, or will they double down on their international supply chains? The stakes have never been higher, and this trade war could be the beginning of a new chapter in global economics. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think this trade war will reshape the way the world approaches international trade? How should automakers adapt to ensure their future success amid this geopolitical instability? Drop your comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates.